has something go right over the top of us that looks like a long cylindrical object that almost looks like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast. We just had something go right over the top of us that looks like a long cylindrical object that almost looks like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast.
Okay, so then, let's get down to it. So tonight, we are talking about two famous cases of possibly extraterrestrial entanglement with the American military. The first in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Robert Salas, and the second, Mario Woods.
Yep.
1975.
Yes.
Ellsworth
Air Force Base. Both nuclear missile silos that housed the Minuteman nuclear deterrent at the time during the Cold War.
So, what we're talking about here then is a long time ago. I mean, 1967 now is a long time ago.
Yes.
We're talking about very, very normal guys. Both of these guys appear to be very, very straight down the line normal guys.
They were definitely normal, from a British perspective, yet normal, but patriots.
Yes. Yes, I mean, you're talking about people ready to push a button to kill 100 million Russian people. That kind of thing.
In Robert Salas's case, most definitely. Mario Woods was more of a guardsman, but equally patriotic.
Exactly.
And will die for the cause. Yes.
Exactly. In 1967, and at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Robert Salas is 20 metres below ground in an impregnable... He's locked in a control room, essentially, where they push the button for the missiles. This guy is actually the person responsible for seeing the nuclear war through, if there ever is one.
Yeah, just to expand on that, he is 20 metres underground, but he is 20 metres under hardened concrete protected from a nuclear blast. So he's not just underground, he's really
there to
buried
make sure,
underground.
Absolutely, to make absolutely sure that no matter what circumstances, those missiles go to Russia and blow people up.
Yes,
that's the kind of mission this guy is. So he's a very serious guy. He's got 10 800 kiloton nuclear weapons. He's on alert status. He's genuinely ready to push the button if the call comes in. That's the state of mind this guy's in.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, the phone rings, and it's not fire the missiles, it's, sir, there's a giant flashing red light outside the front. What do we do?
Yeah.
And first of all, so it's 15 metre wide, let's say, 40 feet, he said. Oval shape. And it's doing things in the sky that aircraft aren't supposed to be able to do. Robert Salas is first of all like, fellas,
Don't waste my time.
don't waste my time.
Yeah.
But then they phone back, screaming into the phone, and he starts to hear these guys out. And what do they say?
Well, firstly, he's reading the tone of the voices. They're terrified. This object is outside the gate. Do you want us to fire? What do we do now? We don't know what's happening. They're doing some sort of scanning. I think they could see beams of lasers emanating from this craft. It wasn't interacting with them from the sense that it was communicating anything to them. It was just there outside the gate. And obviously this is the gate to the control room, not the direct missiles. You've got to remember that the control room is usually situated miles away from the actual missile silos. So this is where the action begins with when it comes to nuclear missile launches. It happens all in the control room, and then the signal's sent from there to these silos that are spotted around the base miles apart. Obviously they're miles apart, so if there was a nuclear detonation over them, you're not taking out all the missiles in one spot. Equally, if a missile is dropped onto the control room, it is under hardened concrete 20 metres down, so unlikely to be affected or destroyed if it was a direct hit. Depends on if it was an air-based nuclear weapon or if it was a ground-based.
So here we are, we've got some of the most serious guys on planet Earth. Suddenly, a giant orange oval shape starts performing manoeuvres that are not just impossible for an aeroplane, but are impossible for people inside to survive. You're talking about accelerating to unimaginable speed, stopping instantly, going back in exactly the same direction the other way, as if it's not even a physical object, we understand it. This thing is literally a miracle. Unfortunately, these guys are in a state of mind where it doesn't matter what the threat is, they've got to shoot it.
It's a threat.
And Robert Salas is basically saying, use force if necessary, I don't care what happens, but don't let it into the camp.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying to them. I don't care if it's aliens, just don't let them in. Whatever you do, don't let them in.
Yeah.
And these guys are screaming, literally screaming. So then, there's another development. He goes to see his commanding officer, the commander there, and while he's talking to the commander, all of a sudden the status lights on every single missile go from green to red. They've all been disabled.
Yes.
And as they find out later on, it's because the guidance system has been misaligned on every single missile, exactly at the same time, 20 metres below ground, concrete, remotely, no physical access whatsoever.
No. They're directly connected. All these missiles are directly connected to the control rooms. That is the only control mechanism that should be able to deactivate, activate, launch, test, whatever is done from that control room.
But interestingly enough, this was not something they had control over. They had to send engineers to each missile to fix this.
Yes.
This is not something they had control over from the control room.
No.
This craft, or whatever it is, somehow physically moved objects, because it was the 60s after all. It was literally a gyroscope and a
physical gyroscope with a few sensors to read its position.
A few sensors, but nothing,
Nothing
you're talking about variable
today,
transistors, you're talking about thermistors, very, very old-fashioned technology by our standards. It didn't even have a microchip in it, probably, back in those days.
No.
So literally, it was physically moving the guidance chip. So it understood the structure of the missile completely.
Yes.
And it took out the part that tells it where to land, to crash, to explode, whatever.
To position where it's positioned,
Because
how it...
this is before the days of multiple re-entry vehicles, independent re-entry vehicles. This was just a missile full of a small detonator and tritium, essentially. In other words, a hydrogen bomb. So that's a very serious thing. If these are extraterrestrial craft, this thing understood what it was dealing with instantly.
It's a good point you make that of the actual systems and the actual capabilities of the time, the fact that it had to be physically moved, the gyroscope had to be physically moved. So it's not like the spacecraft sent a signal and electronically messed it up.
This isn't about
physically
hacking. This is about physically move
the gyroscope,
or however you want to think about it.
Yeah.
It literally, telekinesis, I'm not talking about using the brain, but tele is in the word...
Transmitting.
Exactly. Or without physical means.
Transmitting a force.
And it moved stuff. It is proper telekinesis, telekinetic capability.
And these are multiple missiles. This is not just one missile. It simultaneously altered the state of these gyroscopes in multiple silos at once, instantly, and shut everything down. Because obviously there's a fail-safe. You're never going to...
It's huge.
Yeah.
Because it means that there are forces in the universe equivalent to magic.
Yes.
In our minds.
Yes, from our understanding of physics. Yes.
In other words, there are things. The fabric of the universe is not
as it seems,
as we believe it to be.
No.
It can't be.
No.
There is some sort of ether or something.
There's a level of sentient understanding that we haven't reached yet.
In other words, the power of consciousness is more powerful. Well, maybe not even just consciousness, but will or something.
Yes, we could do it if we knew how.
Exactly. If we knew how, we could do exactly what people call poltergeists.
Yes.
We'll come back to this.
Another show, perhaps.
Exactly. Every missile disabled. Super panic stations. Some of them think it's the Russians. Some of them think it's Israel.
Yeah.
Some of them think it's the end of the world. Some of them think it's Lord Jesus Christ, probably.
I think that end of the world mindset would be quite common in that sort of social environment amongst your peers. You're all there with the capability of ending the world, so anything going wrong would automatically trigger this sense of dread and fear, because you have to look at it with a mindset of paranoia, because the end of the world will come to you, or you will send the end of the world to them. You've got your finger literally on the button that will
these
destroy
people are
everything.
in an almost constant state of panic.
Yes.
That's the simple. They're on the edge of panic professionally their whole lives. That's an interesting point to make. These people could have reacted to this thing by pushing the button.
Not that it would have worked because the missiles would have been shut down, but anyway.
Well, not
Yeah.
after a few minutes, yes. But when he went to talk to his commanding officer and shut the missiles down, do you think it could have believed that he was going to push the button at that point, and that's why it did what it did?
Personally, I don't. I believe there was a demonstration of force by these entities. Or
It was a very interesting time. I mean, 1967,
That's peak.
Vietnam
that's
was
peak.
just beginning.
Yeah, that's peak Cold War. You got proxy wars going on in Vietnam, where Russia and Chinese forces are. The communist state of mind was pushing against the capitalist state of mind. You had ideologies going on, a power struggle. Like I said, proxy war with Vietnam. In the midst of that, it was a very contentious period of time
In other words,
in human
the
history.
aliens had pretty much given up any trust in the future of humankind at that point.
Yes.
Possibly. So here we are in a situation where they can demonstrate what they can do, but nobody seems to... These guys are told never to speak of this. You know, they're taken into a room. You're not going to talk about this. These guys were under orders. They're very loyal, very patriotic, as you said. And he didn't even mention it until he saw sort of above top secrets, the book, years later, and they declassified it. They declassified what happened. At no point did they say, oh, well, maybe this nuclear missile thing isn't such a good idea. The aliens are never going to let us fire them anyway, so what's the point?
No. Didn't inhibit them at all from actually building
They
bigger
just
and
kept
better
building
nuclear.
bigger weapons.
And later on, towards the 70s, 80s, there was the MAD acronym put on, and the understanding that mutually assured destruction would be the best deterrent for us or them firing off nukes at each other. Obviously, that's not with the agreement with the aliens. That's just us saying, well, we'll keep developing these missiles, so if you F with us, we'll F with you as well. I don't think that was on the behest of the aliens. That was just us trying to muzzle our warlike ways in human society.
So just to be clear, if they can remotely disable these missiles, they can remotely fire them too.
Yes, and there have been reports in Russia of a countdown to launch initiated by a UFO. That's something we'll have to revisit. It is definitely an account of it. I'm not sure of the details, but as you're aware, not much comes out of the Soviet Union in those days. Everything that would have happened would be top secret, and still top secret to this day. The military is not as open on the Soviet side as it is on the US side. There are reports of that happening.
That's number one. Now let's look at another case. Let's look at the Mario Woods case. Not a hugely different situation, but... So first of all, he's at November 5 camp in 1975. And he sees lights outside. Now this thing he describes as big as a Walmart. Now I don't really know what a Walmart looks like, but he's talking about a supermarket larger than
Like a
anything we
Costco
have.
or something
like
like
a
that.
Comcast, something gigantic.
Yeah, just to add on to your initial introduction there, he's outside smoking a cigarette, and he sees this light at a distance. Now, at the distance he sees it, he can't work out the size at that point, but he knows it's a large light and it's unusual.
And he thinks it's all sorts of different things. First of all, he thinks it's B-52s, that they're in partnership down at another airbase. Then as it gets closer, he thinks it's helicopters. And then when he gets really close, he begins to realise it's neither of these things. And that's when he starts flashing the base lights on and off, just flicking them on and off, and then going back outside to see what happens. And the first couple of times, this thing appears to respond.
Yes.
So it's flashing the lights with him, and he feels like he's communicating with it at this point.
Some sort of Morse code communication. Obviously, him coming to the realisation that it's not a bomber or a helicopter. He wants to signal whatever this thing is to make sure if it is human made, it's not going to crash into the base or whatever. I guess that's his approach. He at this point, no, he doesn't know what it is, but I don't know if he's jumped to aliens straight away. He's communicating a signal to make them aware of him, and it seems to have worked. Whatever it is flashes back, so it is a form of communication. Yeah.
So then later on, either the next day or later that day, he's in a car with a man called Michael Johnson, and they're driving along. What happens?
Because of his position, he is a guard. They are guardsmen. They are there for security purposes, so they have to do rounds and check everything's okay. They're driving. This is a nuclear missile site base, so you have multiple silos miles apart from each other, so you have a big site to look after. So these guys are driving, and in the distance from behind them, he sees the flashing light again. Mario notices this light. He indicates to his senior, Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson tends to shrug it off as he's not that concerned. It's a light, it's no big deal to him, which I find quite odd, because being in that position, you have to be on alert. You are there to ensure the security of this secure
these guys
site.
are very young. I mean, they're 22.
Yeah, they're young. Yeah, they're young guys.
So they're being relaxed. They're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So they're a fairly relaxed crew.
Yeah.
So they see some flashing lights again. Obviously, this thing's gigantic, and it appears to get closer and closer and closer, and possibly land. They're not really sure exactly what happens.
Yeah, I think another element is it appears to land and disappear, not flash again. But until they get back to their post, they are then called out specifically to check this out. Mario notices the light when he's at his post. It flashes back to him in communication. He's wondering what it is. He speaks to John about this. John shrugs it off. They get a call from the base commander to go and investigate, because there is a security perimeter alert on one of the silos. On the drive out, they are then seeing the light emanating from the distance.
So what triggers that alarm?
So there's a proximity alarm. So each silo is fenced off and has gates. A silo could be the size of a small house, and it has proximity alerts. Could that be a physical cable or whatever?
Right.
So it's saying that there is something beyond the perimeter, within the perimeter of the missile silo.
Some physical disturbance.
You need to go and check it out.
Right.
And that alert's given to them in the command centre, which is obviously miles away from them.
Okay, so off they go
Yes.
in their jeep, or whatever it is.
A Bronco,
They
apparently.
go quite a distance to this silo. It's quite a long way away.
Yeah.
And then the lights appear again, and this time get so close that they aren't really sure whether they enter the craft or what happens.
So the lights, obviously, as they're driving towards the specific silo that they have been ordered to go and investigate, a proximity alert, they're driving towards the silo and the light is there. Now, it's not just a light, because as they draw closer to the silo, they realise that this is a circular craft the size of a Walmart that has a fluid, sort of fiery surface to it. It's not like a structured craft. It's not like the Starship Enterprise. It is not nuts and bolts. It is a fluid-looking orb that is the size of a Walmart. That is huge, emanating light. Like a sun. It's like a sun.
Yeah, so it almost looks like a plasma.
These guys have come up against a big sun-looking like craft hovering over this missile silo. They pull up to the gate, and then that's when things start to get a little bit dicey, because
now, this is a very cold time of year where they are. He's wearing what he refers to as bunny boots, which is basically an inflatable vacuum sealed boot.
Yes.
They're still used today. So at that point, they see what he refers to as beings.
almost as they pull up to the silo, Mario's like, what the hell's that? John is still quite dismissive of all this. He doesn't say anything. Not that he's dismissive, but he doesn't.
Yes.
Michael is dismissive of this, and he doesn't respond to Mario's concerns. They pull up to the silo, and before they get out, they seem to be stuck in their tracks. A force is stopping them from reacting.
Electrically charged.
It's electrically charged.
He describes it being able to taste electricity in the air.
Yes, and also he cannot mobilise himself. They can't move. They can't physically get out the door and have a look.
But he manages to get his flashlight.
Yes.
And he feels unable to breathe.
Yes,
doesn't he?
Yes.
He manages to get his flashlight, and he somehow flashes. I don't know whether it does sort of a few flashes or one flash. And for some reason, at that point, the feeling of petrification ends. So whether the UFO realises it's the same guy, it's possible.
It's the flasher.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Because, after all, he was sent out. So
Yeah.
it's possible up until that moment that the beings didn't realise it was the same guy.
Yes, it is possible.
Or flashing is the international
Morse code for...
"Don't let me breathe again."
Yeah, get your foot off my throat. Yeah. So at that point, after he flashes and communicates by light to this craft,
He opens the
it
car
eases
door.
its grip on him
He opens the car door,
and steps out.
and the ground is no longer frozen at this point. It's mud, which he thinks is unusual because it should have been rock hard, but it's muddy.
Yeah.
So something about this craft is emanating some sort of energy which has actually defrosted the ground.
Yeah.
And is it then when he sees the four beings?
So it's then, just then, as he steps out, he just notices at the corner of his eyes 4 beings walking towards him. 3 that are relatively short, 4 to 5 foot,
Similar
and then
beings.
1 taller being.
Sort of chief being at the back.
Yeah, and these beings have little wands that have glowing tips on them, and the large being has a large glowing
T-shirt
thing on its chest.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting, because there have been a number of accounts of people encountering aliens that have wands with glowing ends to them, and that just was quite a shocking revelation to me, because I've heard a number of accounts that have stated these beings have this wand that they point at you, can put you to sleep, can lift you up in the air, can do all sorts of different things. So there is some correlation there with other experiences. Obviously he's seeing these beings kindly slowly walking towards him, and I can only imagine he had this feeling of absolute dread and fear.
But at this point, Michael Johnson is completely immobile, completely unresponsive.
Yes.
He can't move, he can't speak.
He's frozen
He cannot
still.
even be physically stimulated. He's literally catatonic. Sorry, it's probably the right word.
Yes.
So then, suddenly, is it here he goes into total blackness?
He does black out after he sees the beings. They do telepathically communicate with him, "We will not harm you," but I don't think the communication goes much further than that. He said he saw the faces of the beings. He remembers their faces after hypnotic regression, and he remembers the tall one just looking like a real mean bugger. He was not someone to be trifled with. His subordinates under him, or under his command. So at this point, after making that initial eye contact, the small amount of communication had between them, he blacks out.
What did he say about the actual facial features? Did he say it was like a lizard, or an insect, or a...
It was the usual humanoid looking beings. He did have drawings of them, and the drawings do indicate your stereotypical grey type aliens with the big eyes, the small nose cavities, slits for mouths, and small ears, bald heads.
The 3.
Those are the 3, and I think there's the tall grey, which is another...
Oh, it was like a grey as well?
It was similar in features, which is a commonality, which amazes me even more. If you're going to make a story up, you might as well make it interesting. No one says that these things are different in any way. They're all quite similar.
Well, yes, in a lot of cases this is true.
How we perceive them, anyway.
So at that point he goes into total blackness,
Yes.
and when he comes around he can see, he opens the car door and his vision begins to return. Steps out into the mud, which should have been frozen, and there's a big white wall at an angle
Yes.
that goes to as far as he can see in either direction or something.
Yes.
Which sounds like a truly bizarre...
So that wall turns out to be the reservoir.
Right.
So they have been dropped off at the reservoir, which is 4 miles away from the site they initially encountered the UFO on top of the silo.
Right.
So what has happened, it's been 4 hours by this time he wakes up. So in that 4 hours, they have been either transported, because the car is there with them, Mario's there, and Michael is there in the car still. So the car has been lifted and moved 4 miles away to a nearby reservoir, which they have ended up in. And this reservoir is kind of unpassable normally. People wouldn't... It's very tight and narrow. You couldn't drive down there. So he wasn't under any control to drive down there, because there were no tracks of the car driving down this narrow reservoir pathway. And so it was dropped there. So they weren't coerced mentally and told drive here, drive away, or whatever. As far as we know, as far as he knows, they woke up there, they were dropped there.
And at that moment, the radio begins to go, and he can't get any response from Michael at all, but he's breathing.
Yeah.
And Mario answers the radio, and they're saying, where are you? What's your location? And he's saying, I don't know. And the sergeant's saying, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, they find it. Somehow they find it.
They triangulate their position based on the radio signals.
Right, somehow they find it. Yeah,
but it's something that.
And the sergeant comes over the hill and is finger wagging. What have you lot been doing? Where the hell are you going?
I think protocol dictates that in these interactions, the sergeant that comes to actually retrieve them says that we can't talk about this. I just want you to drop your gun, and I want you to follow us back to base for questioning. Right at this moment, you can assume that they know something's happened as well, but they can't discuss it, and they're not sure themselves, really.
Yes. So the bottom line is the people on site are not really trained to deal with this particularly. They're just given a very Spartan set of instructions. Get them disarmed, because we don't know what state of mind they're in, and get them back to base where we can find out what happened.
Yeah.
And that's all these guys are given. So then they're taken back to base, separated,
and questioned separately.
And questioned. So what happens then?
Well, after they're questioned, Mario kind of gets the inclination from talking to individuals and the responses that this is not something new. I think he learns from hearsay that there were instances of similar things, occurrences happening days before, which indicates that at this period of time, or that decade, that these missile silos were regularly visited by UFOs, obviously taking into account Malmstrom a few years before, and this occurrence. So this is something which indicates to me that is well known by the US government. They've had that many interactions, and I'm sure they've had that many reports and these testimonies of what's happened to know that they have been repeatedly interacted with by alien forces.
So let's get this straight. If this happened, if it was any other situation, because something we didn't actually mention about Mario is that he saw a UFO as a child with his mum and his sister in his car on the way to school.
Yeah.
And they were in a traffic jam on the way to school, and literally he described it as 1,500 people saw these flying saucer things. Now, if this was any other natural or explainable phenomena, it would be internationally accepted. But obviously, because it's outside of the realms of comfortable science, we have to pretend it's not there.
Yes. It's the elephant in the room that just never gets spoken about,
Because
no matter what the scenario.
as soon as you admit it exists, what's the point in a nuclear missile or the army? We're completely defenceless against these things anyway.
Yes, the army have to put up that facade that this nuclear deterrent is everything we need. They will never be able to tell you that we spent billions and trillions of dollars on this nuclear deterrent when it's absolutely useless if we were to be invaded by these creatures.
Well, we don't even know if they'd ever even let us fire them. I mean, the only time they ever got away with firing them was the first time they used them, and up until then they didn't even know we had them.
Yeah.
So every single time, for all we know, the whole thing could have been a complete waste of money. They might have just shut them off.
I'm sure they knew we had them, I just didn't think they knew that we would use them, or we were going to use them in that sense. You've got to remember that these craft are powered by some force or some type of fusion energy of some sort, maybe.
Maybe.
Well, the indication of that is also what we didn't add on, is that when Mario was looked over by the doctor, he had burns. He had radiation burns on his skin.
Well,
which
he had sunburns, didn't he?
Sunburn, but that is akin to like sort of light radiation.
Yeah, but it's unlikely to have been
Harmful,
alpha or beta radiation,
No.
because you'd have to be too close to that. I mean, it could have just been a result of the light.
Well, yeah.
You know.
But it is a common occurrence that people have got physical marks and scarring from being too close to craft.
But these things are beyond just energy propulsion.
Yeah.
If you can turn off and move things at a distance, are you even restricted by the speed of light?
Obviously not.
I mean,
Apparently not.
Is that action, that telekinetic force, it's not explainable by relativity.
Well, exactly, and this is what lends to the theory that this is more interdimensional than extraterrestrial in some cases, because only something that's interdimensional can phase through those sort of barriers of common physics and knowledge and bypass them.
Well, I mean,
if you can fold time and you can fold space, you're limitless, aren't you?
well, I mean, obviously we only understand.
From our perception.
Our current model is
Yeah.
that that's impossible, but our model's obviously completely wrong.
Well, yes, it would appear so. Shall we conclude what these two interactions?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the fact that both of these craft appear to be very, very linked with visible light. They appear to be of a similar colour, a sort of orangey, glowing, reddy, sort of fusiony colour.
Yes.
In fact, they both resemble stars in some way, and they're both of a similar sort of roundish, ovally shape,
Yes.
and they're both silent. And they both appear to be able to accelerate to unbelievable speed and stop on a sixpence without any signs of momentum at all.
Or any external sign of propulsion. That it's just there.
These just decide to be somewhere in there.
Yeah.
They're both obviously interested in nuclear weapons specifically. Neither of them were particularly hostile. The truth is that the Salas case, is an example where they either were making sure they could turn the weapons off or demonstrating they could turn the weapons off, is what it appears to be. But they've done it twice, which to me almost makes you think that they were trying to demonstrate,
Yes.
because they were thinking, well, they're not going to bother keeping them if we prove we can turn them off.
That's a logical thought. Why would they bother this expenditure on such devilish devices if they are
If we're
null
not
and
violent.
void?
But of course, the most important thing about a nuclear weapon is that people know you have it.
Yes.
That's all that really matters. You could have achieved exactly the same thing if there was no warhead in it at all. All you've got to do is convince everyone it had one. Because let's face it, if you ever fire it, no one's ever going to remember what happened anyway.
No.
But, having said that, the second bunch, so they did no physical harm to the weapons, the first group, the 1967 Salas group. They just demonstrated they could disable them. They didn't make them explode or make them fizz out or blow the fuses or anything. They just knocked the guns off. And they were reasonably polite about it, really, I have to say. The second guys were more disturbing.
There was a greater interaction between individuals and the beings and craft.
The question is, because obviously these guys are young guys, they don't know much about the missiles. If you take them somewhere and read their minds, you're never going to find out that much about what the technology is. They're just guards.
Yeah.
So what were they doing with these guys for 4 hours, would you guess?
Well, what I always guess they do is take samples of their genetic codes.
But if they were there for the missiles, why would they suddenly be interested in genetic code?
Well, I don't think the guards were. They were expecting the guards to be there. So the guards disturbed them from doing what they were going to do.
Is it possible that one of the reasons they black out is that they're literally being used to sort of replay parts of that? Could you find out them walking through the control room? Could you literally use them as a remote video camera, if you see what I mean?
Oh yes, I'm sure they have the capability to completely read every single memory they've had since birth.
So is it possible they were using them to find out stuff that they didn't even know? Like
yes,
literally
subconsciously.
Stuff they'd just seen out of the corner of their eye and never even thought about. And the aliens were somehow able to pause it, go back, zoom in.
Surely, I mean, what would be interesting, which is not available, is the accounts of the guardsmen at the Malmstrom Air Base. I can't seem to find much record of them actually stating any interaction. That would be interesting. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to abduct one of these missile technicians or one of these missile base individuals, you would surely want to abduct the commander or someone that presses the button or someone that actually fixes or engineers these things. But I don't think they needed that. These beings probably have the capability to scan the whole silo and scan every inch of that silo, no matter how deep it is or what barriers you put in place. So they can map out the circuitry, they can map everything out and work it out themselves. I mean, if you have the knowledge to traverse time and space, You know, that's just child's play to you.
I suppose to them, literally, electronic circuit is just ridiculous.
It's basic Stone Age stuff to them.
Because of course, it all gives out electromagnetic signals, so
Yes.
they would be able to not just see the structure of it, but to be able to tell what it was doing at any moment.
Yes, and each functionality of each component, I would have thought.
Fascinating.
Yes.
So, one thing to add about Wood is that after he was questioned, he went and sat in the toilet for half an hour and had an out-of-body experience where he felt he was dying and his soul was being sucked out through the bottom of his feet. Now, do you think that was related to something that the people in the craft did, or do you think that was just a sort of emotional response to what had just gone through?
I think it's a mixture of the two. I can't imagine if you had that level of interaction with an alien being that you would ever feel normal, especially an hour or so after the incident happened. And you can only assume that if he was abducted, that they would have carried out a number of tests on him, and they would have got into his head, because as he clearly stated, they did interact with him telepathically. So there is nothing to say that he wasn't telepathically communicated with within those 4 hours while he was on the ship, and what was done to him.
So are you thinking that the actual invasiveness of telepathic communication is disturbing to somebody? It's sort of like the parts of the mind being awoken by this process, literally creating a sort of reality that's uncomfortable for him?
I think that's one element of it. I think the other element of it is that he was missing for 4 hours, and 4 hours an alien could do a lot of things to you.
Yes, undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly. So we can only make assumptions on what has actually happened. The result would be a strange sensation after the experience, and that has probably resulted in this out-of-body experience he had in the cubicle.
You would have thought that they would record all of your thoughts while they've got the chance.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, they could be reading your mind for everything that your eyes have seen throughout your whole life in a split second, probably. There have been interactions that I've seen in previous cases that, you know, once this being telepathically connects with you, you can see what they're thinking and understand their being, and they can understand yours. You are kind of interlinked. Now, is that a sort of download of information that you have latent in the back of your mind from their experiences as well? Who knows? These are all things that we'll yet to discover, I guess.
I suppose they sort of need to tidy up the conscious part of your mind so that you don't have too much memory of what happened, at least consciously anyway.
Exactly, so they're going to be blocking out these experiences that you have interacted with them in this period of abduction.
Because we're assuming that the current sort of model of our memory is even capable of interpreting the time we spend in their company.
Yes.
I mean, if we couldn't rationalise it in the way we think about the universe at the moment, would you even remember it anyway?
Well, yes, we rely on our senses to give us information. We rely on our ears to hear something, our eyes to see something.
But would it be like sort of being 6 months old, where your model of the universe hasn't yet become the way it is when you're in later life, so you have no sort of access to that time in your life? I mean, you don't remember being born, obviously.
No. But you've got to remember that they are signalling telepathically something to you. You are downloading you're chemically or electronically downloading information through your neurons to communicate experiences, thoughts, sights, pictures. All sorts of things are being downloaded instantaneously into your mind. For an ape-like mind like us, that must just be overwhelming.
But the conception of the ape-like mind is only here in this current model we have of the universe.
Yes,
if they have a freer model, a model that isn't language dependent, for instance, the language to them is a much smaller part of their consciousness rather than being the sort of defining part of it. Is it possible that we just don't remember what happened anyway?
Who knows? You know, we can only sit here and speculate on this whole interaction phase of the experience. One thing we do know, though, that in most cases, when an abduction happens, the person abducted usually has their mind wiped to some degree and they don't remember it.
Yes.
And it takes a great effort from hypnosis, regression, to actually start to recall the information that has been gathered in that blanked out space of time that you're missing.
Well, but even surely they could use that to access periods before you remember things as a child, though.
Well, of course they can. I mean, we have cases of people remembering past lives and so forth.
So
we are assuming we know that we are born and we die and that's it. But whereas you could have lived 100 lives before and have 100 lives of experiences all cooped up.
Yes, but I suppose what it is it's not necessarily a sign that they wiped our memory. It could just be that it's something not interpretable.
Yes.
In a current state, that you need to be in a hypnotic state or something like that to get back to, just like being born.
Yes, your level of consciousness needs to be altered for you to interpret it correctly.
Exactly. One thing to note, summing up Mario, there are videos of him out there where he goes to visit the site where it all happened, where he is extremely emotional and distraught. This had a completely profound effect on this man, that he's still processing all this time later.
Yeah, he became obsessed with triangles and pyramids and things where he was never interested in that before. Now, is that a latent download that he's received of some information that he just hasn't got access to in this conscious state that he carried, a normal conscious state, should we say?
Did they tell him the history of humankind? And it's connected to the pyramid.
It's fascinating,
great thing to speculate about.
Yes.
But of course, there's nowhere to go with it in terms of discovery.
We have no scientific experimentation on this phenomenon.
And no one's interested in conducting any because it will disgrace them and they'll be out of the science world.
For now, but who knows what the future holds,
Exactly. Well, I think we'll wind it up there because in terms of conclusion, all we can really say is what?
We can say that the beings are very interested in our nuclear capabilities. They don't want us to misuse this technology in a fashion that could destroy the planet. They don't really they don't mean us much harm, because if they did, we would be gone by now.
And it's possible, let's face it, I mean, to me, the most likely explanation for this whole thing is that they can stop our nuclear weapons, and they just wanted to make sure they can.
It's a test, yes.
And they tried convincing us that they could stop them, but if they did push the button, do you think that they would intervene?
No, I don't think they would. I think that they have much higher of a consciousness than us, that they will let us make our own destiny. And if that is to kill ourselves, then that is our destiny.
I don't think that's right. I think that all the cattle mutilation and everything else, there's too many people out there too interested in experimenting down here. I think if they pushed the button, if they really were that insane, I think that somebody would bloop, and they'd just fall out of the sky or fall into the sea or something.
You could be absolutely right. I mean, we can take what's going on today as a sort of precursor to that, where we have a standoff between China, Russia and ourselves again. We don't know what could happen, and we're starting to see a higher influx of UFO sightings, things getting shot down, unidentified. We have a ton of leaked documents from the military coming out. The world is changing, and we're starting to open our eyes a little bit more than we did before.
They could just do another Noah.
Yeah,
just
flood.
You're not going to destroy all life. Just a good bit of washing society away.
Yeah.
Because what you'd basically be destroying is roads, and people would find a way to survive in a cave on a mountain somewhere.
Yeah.
And all you've got to do is stop them remembering where Tokyo was. And would they ever find it again? By the time they do, it's going to be under 50 feet of mud.
Sediment, yeah.
And, here we are again.
Yeah. Who knows that if that hasn't happened in multiple
I'm
of
sure
times.
it has. I'm sure it has. But that sounds like another podcast to me.
Indeed it does.
Okay. Good speaking to you.
Bye-bye.